Hi, welcome to my home and to my channel. I'm Debbie, and yes, I'm coming from the Pacific Northwest where I live, and I am also offering you a weekly episode on something good about all the generations, the seniors, the Gen Zers, and everybody in between. So come along with me and let's get started.
Woke up this morning feeling fine. There's something special on my mind. Last night I met a new girl in the neighborhood. Whoa, yeah. Something tells me I'm into something good. Something tells me I'm into something. She's the kind of girl who's not too shy, and I can tell I'm her kind of guy. She danced close to me like I hope she would. She danced for me like I hope she would. Something tells me I'm into something good. Something tells me I'm into something. We only danced for a minute or two, and then she stuck close to me the whole night through. Can I be the one in love? She's everything I've been dreaming of. She's everything I've been dreaming of. I walked her home and she held my hand. I knew it couldn't be just a one night stand. So I asked to see her next week, and she told me I could. I asked to see her and she told me I could. Something tells me I'm into something good. Something tells me I'm into something. Something tells me I'm into something.
Good morning, class. Let's all stand up and do our Pledge of Allegiance. Did you do your homework? Are you ready to start your day? It's your Miss Debbie, and today's episode is all about teaching. In fact, a reflection of my memories as a lower elementary teacher, specializing in kindergarten, first and second grade, with a smattering of preschool, a little bit of fourth grade that I remember, and all sorts of memories that I'm going to share with you about my life as a professional licensed educator. But we have to start at the very, very beginning. The very beginning for me it's as far back as I can absolutely remember, which would be in the mid-1950s, watching Romper Room. I know a lot of you baby boomers that are watching remember Romper Room, where it would be like Miss Sue or Miss Nancy, and she would look into her wand and she would say, I see Lisa, and I see Tommy, and I see Debbie. I actually thought that the teacher on Miss Romper Room's show was looking at me. In any case, I've always known that I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up. And in fact, so much so that as far back as I can remember, I would play school. I would play school with my dolls, my stuffed animals, and if I didn't have anything like that around, or if I didn't have an opportunity to grab the neighborhood kids and be the teacher and play school with them, I would just line up crayons. I'd line up anything and give them names like Bluey and Yellowy and Greeny, and I would be their teacher. I remember one time that I was sick in a children's hospital for several months back in the, I think it was the early 1960s. And of course, we were in our hospital beds. And as I was recovering, I had my stuffed animals lined up, and I was playing school to make the time go by with my little mini chalkboard and all the little mini little books that I would use to pretend that I was teaching my stuffed animal students. I've always known at the very core of who I am, always, that I never had to struggle trying to figure out my life's purpose or what I was going to do when I graduated school. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher of elementary students. And fortunately for me, I could afford to be a teacher. Not everybody can. A lot of teachers that I worked with, especially in my prime years in my 30s and 40s, they held down 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs, because teaching wouldn't always pay for the mortgage or pay the rent. So they went on to take on extra side gigs, as we call them today. But in any case, I always found a job as a teacher. It was never an issue for me. It was more about being able to pay all the bills having to do with being a teacher on a teacher's income. I still believe that our society in this country doesn't pay teachers what they deserve to be paid, and hopefully someday that can turn around. But in any case, when I was in university, I really loved my senior year the most because that's when we had student teaching. And I was in Tucson at the time at the University of Arizona, and I went to the Tucson Private Academy there and did my student teaching with a second grade class. And I was so excited, especially to get my diploma and be able to live my dream of being a teacher. This was in the mid-1970s when I started. I started at a preschool as a preschool teacher. I also worked with as a camp counselor with young students. So there was always something, even Sunday school. There were always ways for me to be able to integrate teaching into my life, even starting out in my early 20s and beyond. I also wanted to share with you the fact that in our culture, there have been so many alliterations of teaching through the decades, through the centuries. We can go back to the times when on the prairie, the teachers would be in a one-room schoolhouse, similar to what we would see on that famous TV show now in syndication called Little House on the Prairie. I always thought of myself as being Miss Beadle, the school marm with the bun in her hair and the long dress on the prairie, being the teacher in the one-room schoolhouse. And the students being very respectful of Miss Beadle. Nowadays, I don't even want to begin to imagine what it's like for teachers in a classroom with all the world changes that we've had, having to teach and probably discipline at the same time. But in any case, Miss Beadle was my alter ego. I always thought of myself as the teacher on the prairie with the bun in my hair and being with wonderfully polite, well-dressed and very prim and proper young boys and girls folding their hands and, raising their hands and being good kids. And having parents that were really supportive, but that's another issue altogether. In any case, I went to university and got my undergraduate, my 4-year degree in education in the year 1974. And society has had a lot of changes, and of course there have been changes within the classroom setting as well. But for me, it came down to just enjoying who I worked with, not just the classroom, but the supportive parents and my teacher friends, my comrades in the other classrooms. I made some very, very lifelong friends that way. And also the principals that I would work under that would give me the latitude to be creative and to cover the curriculum and at the same time be able to put my own slant and my own humor on things to make it a joyful experience for everyone, which it was. I also want to emphasize the fact that it is what I call, and this is more of a spiritual reflection, but it's a core sense of who I am at my very core. If I were to try to describe who I am, including all the different things I've done in my life and the experiences I've had, if I were to try to sum it up in a word or two, I would just say that who I am at my very core is a teacher, is somebody who teaches, who expresses from one individual to another or to a group to learn and to grow and to be a part of a larger format and experience in life. So a teacher is really a reflection of who I am at its most core. And I feel also spiritually it's more of a soul contract. I feel like I came into this world honestly with a soul contract that in some way or another I would be teaching, I would be enlightening, I would also learn, because it's a two-way experience. You get just as much from the students and the people you interact with as they do from you. So it's just always been my core of who I am. And the reason I bring this up is because there was an award-winning movie that came out in the, I think 2010, something around that time, called Still Alice. And in this movie, it had to do with, unfortunately, with the advent of Alzheimer's and dementia, with a character in this named Alice who was a very educated linguistic writer and professor, and she actually wrote textbooks in linguistics and in speaking. The thing is, she started having early onset Alzheimer's, it had to do with her being able to make sense of this early onset diagnosis and how she would move forward in her life, knowing that as time would progress and as her disease would progress, that she would start losing her memory. But there was a scene in there that was very enlightening to me, and I want to pull it up so that you can take a look. In the scene, she was visiting, as a preemptive visit, a senior Alzheimer's retirement facility. And she was learning from the directors and the people who work there about how these patients, these Alzheimer's and dementia patients, are able to keep their core sense of who they are even though they're losing their memory. And the scene that is projected was something that always stuck with me. They were explaining that even though these mostly elderly people could not remember even the most basic things about who they were or their families or anything that would have been normalized, they could remember at their core who they were. And I'm going to pull up this an example so that you can see what I'm talking about, because to me, the core memory of who you are, and in my case a teacher, would always be there no matter what. And so that's just my belief, and I'll pull up this little segment right now so you can see what I'm referring to. Let's take a look.
We saw after a while that large group activities left most of the residents unengaged and even distressed by the confusion they experienced from all the stimulation. So we redefined activities to include all interactions between staff and residents in the unit. Staff looks for opportunities to make meaningful connections with residents, starting with knowing about the person who they've been and what makes them comfortable. One woman who had worked as a nurse sat part of most days in the nursing station writing notes.
That's heartbreaking.
Yes, but it's a behavior we see time and again. But there are men. There's William over there. William was part of the team that sent the first satellite into orbit.
So in this episode, they showed that the term activity for these inpatient senior citizens that are in the care center, they redefine activity, and a lot of redefining their activity, even those that don't get out of their chairs all day, has a lot to do with their core memory of who they are. And by memory, I use that term basically meaning the essence of who they are is reenacted even as they are aging. And I truly believe that I will never lose that core sense of myself no matter what. Of course, I would never wish that kind of diagnosis on anyone, and hopefully that will never happen. But I found that scene in that movie to be very significant because of the fact that we never lose at our core who we are. That's my belief, and that's what I'm sharing. Also talking about the history of teaching, it goes way back in this country. In fact, all the way back to times on the prairie. The McGuffey Reader, that was the book that started young people, especially those that were working in the fields and working on the farms and in the aggregate culture that we had way back 150 years ago in the 1850s and beyond. They had the old-fashioned books for reading and arithmetic. And it was just very precious. I also am pulling up a little memory from Little House on the Prairie, which of course was that 1970s TV show that was so cute because, as I mentioned about Miss Beadle in her classroom, that would have been me back then. I really think in a past life I would have been like that. I resonate with that very much. And I love the fact that these children seem to have a sense of their placement in the world. A lot of whom would just go in and work in the family farm and the ranch. It was well before the time of that we have today, of course. I also knew that as a little girl, when I would be playing school, I would just gather anybody and everybody who wanted to come along. Even my grandmother, I remember, would come up, and she had broken English because she came from the old country. So I would be playing teacher with my grandmother and doing things like spelling and music and all sorts of things. And she went along with it as a good grandmother would. But in any case, I really do feel like teaching was was, is, and will always be at the core of who I am. And I've done a lot of other things as well in life, which many of you know, and I'll expand on that in another episode. Another thing I'm going to bring up here is a movie that was so popular. It came from a 1960s book called Up the Down Staircase by an author by the name of Belle Kaufman. And Belle wrote a bestseller about a typical classroom of the 60s. This happened to be for high school, but it starred Sandy Dennis, that actress, and it was a hilarious look into what it was like to be a teacher in that time, in that era, as society was changing. And these, of course, were high school students too. So it was hilarious. And I know that I loved it because I thought, okay, if that's what the teaching world is going to be about, sign me up. I'm ready for it. Another film that was massively popular in the late 60s, I'm sure you remember as well, To Sir with Love, with the late great Sidney Poitier. Again, about education, this time in Britain, during the pop top music era of the Beatles. And of course, Sidney Poitier being the hero of this classroom of unruly students whose lives were turned around by him. I was so proud of my very first ability to be a teacher, which meant getting my license. I was licensed in 5 states. I was licensed, as you can see from this photo, at the state of Nevada, the one where I taught the longest, 20 some years. But I also taught in the states of California, Ohio, Michigan, and Arizona. For the sake of brevity, I'm just going to talk about my longest years as a teacher in the state of Nevada. My very first teaching job was in 4th grade at the Hebrew Academy in our suburb called Summerlin. My 4th grade students really kept me on my toes. I'll never forget in the 1996 academic year when Bill Clinton was running for president and he kept talking about building a bridge to the 21st century. My students really thought there was going to be an actual bridge like the Golden Gate. What's up with that? Among the many ways that I contributed to the 4th grade experience, I played piano, of course, and so being a Hebrew Academy, we had a Hanukkah show, and my students, some of them were being candles, like the menorah, and some of them were being in a play, which I helped to write, direct, and they did a really great job. I was so proud of my 4th grade students. That December, we actually made the Las Vegas Sun regular newspaper readership with our play. And of course, it gave me some kudos with our principal. How about the name Maryhill School? That was one of the schools I taught at. Perfect for teaching kindergarten and 1st grade, which is what I did for a number of years in the late 90s. And my students were wonderful. I remember my Maryhill kindergarten students that put together their science projects, yes, even in kindergarten, and they did such a remarkable job. I was so proud of all their learning and growth, and it's something that personally I'll never forget. Here's a collage of some of my students from kindergarten class. I wonder if they became productive citizens after all these decades. Of course, with kindergarten and 1st grade, we always had lots of class parties, lots of projects, lots of plays. We had a good time. In all the years that I was a teacher, going all the way back to my very first year, this 1974-75 year, all the way up to when I ended in 2016, my very, very favorite time of all my years as a teacher was at Challenger School in Las Vegas, Nevada. Here's a wonderful picture of my kindergarten students from the 2001-2002 year. You can see with their uniforms how sweet they are. I cannot begin to tell you how happy I was at that school. I was at that school for 4 years straight. I loved my principal. I loved everything about it, and I will never forget. It was the pinnacle of all my teaching was at Challenger School. And so obviously this brings a lot of memories, a little bit of tears to my eyes with joy. It's very hard to sum up all these decades worth of memories that I have working with kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, or as they call it, lower elementary. Here's a 1st grade class yearbook photo. I remember in 1st grade, there would always be a student every week with a front tooth that was falling out, and therefore the tooth fairy would come and visit. I remember all those discussions the next day about how much money was left by the tooth fairy. I also was able to renew a contract, sometimes go to a new school or a different school where I'd make a higher salary. Here's a school that was called Alexander Dawson School, and I taught second grade for a number of years there. These are the students from my class yearbook. I'll never forget in particular a unit all about Canada that my second grade class was presenting for a contest. And as you can see, we had everything right down to hockey sticks and a real live husky. Well, last but not least, here's Debbie in third grade. And yes, that's my class. I bet some of my viewers are recognizing who they are in good old Toledo, Ohio. And as we come to a close, I want to just say thank you so much for following this episode about school life and being a teacher. There I am. That's Debbie, age 8. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful week. Tune in next week for another new topic. See you then. Bye.